Movement has always been really important to me in first-person shooters, especially as someone who has an addiction to trampolines. I think that's part of why I've always liked Halo more than Call of Duty or Battlefield. In Halo, it feels like you're bouncing around, combining precise movement with crouch jumps and grenade jumps to reach places easier, whereas Battlefield or COD feels sluggish. Like the character you're controlling lost their family to a horrible jumping accident, and every time you press A, they have to relive and overcome the trauma of that dark time in their life before they can actually jump. And that situation sounds ridiculous, but I'm that person. I have this jumping-related trauma and an addiction to trampolines. My life is a fucking nightmare. Anyway, it's sluggish. I should have just stopped at sluggish. But I think you get what I mean now. Movement in FPSs has become more important in the last decade, with things following in the more arcadey style of Halo rather than the realistic style of COD, when it comes to movement specifically. One of the children that was born during this fun movement baby boom in first-person shooters is Titanfall 1. But that game is just multiplayer, so the movement doesn't reach its full potential. So let's talk about Titanfall 2 instead. With the campaign, Titanfall 2 can now experiment and expand and show off its movement way better, and it takes full advantage of that. The campaign begins with you entering a simulation so you can get some training done. Already a fantastic decision. You're now in the Gauntlet, a comprehensive, easily digestible tutorial for the movement and how it interacts with shooting. You learn how to jump, wall run, slide, double jump and shoot. All of these actions are very simple and smartly contextual. To wall run, you don't jump at a wall and press another button at the right time, you just jump at a wall and then your character starts running on that wall. You don't press a different button to slide, you just push the crouch button while running. This means movement, no matter how complex or simple, requires the use of the A button, B button, left stick and right stick. The intricacy of movement and the button inputs required to achieve that intricacy is largely left up to the player. Thus the player will always improve at the base movement mechanics at their own pace. You'll probably never feel left behind, because the depth of movement is always there, so just take your time and dive in when you feel comfortable. Now that's not to say the game doesn't provide any challenging platforming, but the movement is so easy to pick up that by the time they do start pushing you, you'll feel ready to face that challenge. The Gauntlet also allows the game to establish the language of movement. By running through it to get the hang of things, you'll start to pick up on what type of objects can be interacted with in terms of movement. You'll discover that you can run on practically any wall and how a curved wall affects a wall run. You'll learn the distance, speed and momentum of a slide, and the timing required to maintain the momentum you had going into that slide. Now you won't learn everything necessary for understanding movement, but it's a good primer for the rest of the game. After a prologue, the campaign really starts after Cooper, who the player controls, wakes up on the planet Typhoon. He inherits a Titan and is forced to become a pilot out of necessity. The environment here is lush and full of energy and life, looking really beautiful. But what's really important about the environment here is the rocks. And yes, that does sound kind of silly, but I'm making a point. The rock contrasts the greenery and provides flat, even surfaces, perfect for wall running across. The developers have managed to easily communicate where movement is possible without breaking the immersion of the world, because it makes sense for there to be rock amongst the plant life. Not only do these rock faces efficiently let you know what you can run across, but where you should be running to. Seriously, these rocks are such a great little game design tool, teaching the player the movement mechanics, showing the player where to go, and doing that while making the world still feel believable. There's not a total commitment to this natural signposting, as you can at all times press a button to have a destination marker show up, but it's still up to the player, so if you don't want it intruding, then don't let it. Initially in this mission you'll find yourself without the double jump. It's kind of frustrating seeing as you just got used to it in the Gauntlet, but this restriction comes with a purpose. Without a double jump, you have to commit to wall runs. You can't get halfway across the wall and then use your 2 jumps to skip the rest of it. This seems insignificant, but there's a distinct feel and progression of a wall run in Titanfall 2 that you'll need to understand to get the most out of movement, especially later in the game. When you jump at a wall, you'll sort of snap to it and begin running along it. Immediately, the arc of the wall run is largely defined as you hold forward on the thumbstick. You'll get an initial burst of speed that deteriorates as you stay on the wall longer. As the run goes on, you'll begin slipping down the wall, which is why I call it an arc. There's the rise of the jump, then there's some sustained height that slowly falls off as your speed decreases, which finally leaves you to drop off the wall. If you didn't know any of this because you kept skipping the latter half of this arc with the double jump, you'd find yourself lost later on in the game, where you have to understand the feeling of a wall run to judge when you should jump from one surface to another and avoid death. When you do get that double jump back though, you really appreciate it. The most important thing here is again the feel, specifically the feeling of your jump being propulsed. Your first jump feels rather spontaneous, like your character doesn't bend at the knees to get the most height. That's because your character has a jump kit, which provides a burst of energy to give a jump extra height. To make the first jump feel more natural, there's a small amount of vibration feedback in the controller and a distinct sound of the jump kit going off. In addition, the jump starts out with you gaining height very quickly and slowing as you reach the apex of the jump, eventually having you hang in the air before falling back to the ground. All of these elements combine to create a jump that is efficient and quite high, while still making sense in its core feeling. This speed and height is also just fun. It feels good to go fast and jump high, so being able to create a logical jump while hanging on to the core fun of jumping as a gameplay action is super important, and Respawn has certainly done that here. So then what about the second jump, or the double jump? Where the first jump is assisted by the jump kit, the second is driven by it. The sound of the jump kit going off is weightier and has more bass. The vibration feedback on the controller is stronger and longer. The vibration of the first jump is more like a pulse, compared to the second where it feels like a burst that hangs around a little. To get even more granular, look at the pilot's hands during the first and second jump. In the first, the hands and weapon drag behind from the sudden speed of the jump, having to be pulled back up into position, and then in the second, the drag is less dramatic. The jump kit isn't just launching you up, but fighting against gravity and any downward momentum you may have. But why does this matter? Well, it feels natural for one. The jump kit has been established as a thing, and its presence can be felt in different ways during the first and second jump. This contributes to a consistent, satisfying feel that we can rely on throughout the game to pull off cool platforming and movement. But by having the second jump rely on the jump kit, so many fun movement possibilities are opened up. Let's look at some examples. By having a second jump that's powered by a force outside of the character, you can jump forward with your first jump and back with your second. This level of control lets you make adjustments mid-air, allowing you to correct your mistakes and feel like you've successfully overcome a little challenge when you use the second jump to reconfigure and land safely. This can also be applied in combat scenarios, using the double jump to avoid enemy fire or to line yourself up for a melee kill right as you hit the ground. This directional second jump also impacts speed. You can hold forward during the second jump to get more distance and speed out of it. This obviously contributes to the earlier examples, but also makes chaining together different movement tools to create a sort of combo line, if you will, easier and more fun, thanks to that extra distance and speed. I know I've just talked about the jump in this game for a comical amount of time, but it's important, I swear. It demonstrates and represents how the game's movement makes sense within its world, while feeling viscerally fun and satisfying to its players. The movement options in Titanfall 2 are very video gamey in isolation, but don't feel that way while playing. To an extent at least. The game manages to make this complex looking movement rather simple, but not just in the controls, which I mentioned earlier. We've gone through two ways the game teaches you movement, the Gauntlet and the slow build of platforming complexity you're presented with, but there's also a third, ghosts. If you approach a platforming challenge and sit at its beginning for a few seconds, a ghost will load in. This is essentially a hologram that runs the platforming section to show you the solution to it. Now, this sounds too easy and hand-holdy, but it's really not. Like I said, the ghost only loads up after a few seconds, so it will only be viewable by players who've hesitated, regardless of if that hesitation was out of confusion or misunderstanding on how to proceed. Furthermore, the ghost has to be activated by the player, pressing down on the D-pad to make it play, so not only will players confident with the movement never see ghosts, but even less confident players who like to solve it themselves can do just that. The way Titanfall 2 teaches you movement is accessible and simple without being patronizing, and feeling respected by a game is generally more enjoyable. So you've got all your base movement abilities in your hands and you've been taught how to use them. Let's see how the game combines them with the shooting. The simple controls make shooting and moving really easy, and the movement controls rarely overlap with the combat controls. So you can almost always multitask, simultaneously killing enemies and doing some fun traversal. The snap of the wall run gives you the freedom you need to make accurate enough shots. Shooting and wall running is certainly more challenging than just doing one or the other, but it's not so difficult that you'll give up on trying. This gives a great sense of reward and accomplishment when you actually do get kills while wall running, contributing to the larger sense of fun that the movement provides. On top of this, you can also shoot while sliding, travelling on zip lines, or just in the air in general. So the opportunity to keep killing without stopping is always in front of you. You just have to be good enough to take it. The shooting itself is fast-paced and chaotic, with a really short time to kill. I usually dislike a fast time to kill as I feel it often diminishes the disparity felt between weapons, where all the assault rifles and SMGs may feel inconsequentially different. But Titanfall 2 avoids this by having a smaller range of weapons and giving these weapons more distinct characteristics. More importantly, it avoids this thanks to the movement systems. Because movement is exaggerated and dynamic, the way you move will change pretty dramatically depending on what weapon you're using. When using the car SMG, you'll take advantage of wall runs more because it has good accuracy when firing from the hip. But if you're using the alternator SMG, you'll double jump out of wall runs to give yourself some hang time in the air, which you use to your advantage by aiming down sights and making more accurate shots. You likely won't be making constant conscious decisions to change your movement style along with your weapon, but you will adapt your movement to a weapon's strengths, providing a flux in combat that keeps the game feeling fresh and exciting. That being said, the game really has no problem staying fresh. You're constantly faced with new movement challenges, with the game introducing a new mechanic, giving you the rewarding feeling of mastering it, and then providing you with another concept to improve at. As you progress, each obstacle gets more precarious, complex, and dangerous than the last. In the first level, you go from having to make simple wall runs over a small drop, to having to double jump into and out of wall runs to progress, to chaining together wall runs over a bottomless pit. And then a mission or two later, and you're travelling through a factory on a small town that gets built over the mission's length, having to respond as it's twisted, turned, and constructed around you. Then not long after, you get the time Gauntlet, allowing you to shift between two different timelines. This in particular shows how fantastic the evolution of locomotion is in Titanfall 2. The time Gauntlet is used with a simple button press, and it allows the game to reuse old platforming concepts with a new twist. This consistent, reoccurring arc of facing and mastering different movement techniques is pretty transparent, but the game always manages to surprise you, making sure to only just retread ground, but also go further than you expected. The evolution doesn't stop there though. You get a hold of an arc tool, which you use to power things on and off, possibly controlling fans, robots, or platforms. The unfortunate thing about this is that these different movement elements don't always collude. You never have the time Gauntlet and the arc tool at the same time, and I believe a lot of potential is missed because of that. Here's an example. In the 6th level, the beacon, you have to travel across the beacon construction site. At times, you have to use cranes to move hanging walls into place so you can run across large gaps. Imagine if this crane mechanic, the arc tool, and the time Gauntlet were combined for a platforming section. Let's say in one timeline the hanging walls are malfunctioning, making them electrified, and in the other they're fine. So you use the cranes in different timelines to line the walls up. You jump onto a safe platform, jump off of it and switch timelines, and then use the arc tool to power down the electrified wall you're about to land on, with you repeating this a few times to make it safely to the other side. I think this would be a really satisfying, fun challenge to overcome, and Titanfall 2 never really takes the time to explore more complex movement sections like this. Now, maybe they did during development and found it was just too much, but I personally think having these different devices interact would be a lot of fun, and I feel like Respawn didn't quite reach the potential these mechanics had. This isn't a complaint per se, because I don't think the campaign becomes boring due to its exclusion, but I was left wanting a bit. These more intricate challenges didn't have to be in the campaign even. In fact, I think they'd shine more as additional gauntlets, with a timer and scoreboards, possibly as a part of a different mode that has like 8 to 10 of these harder platforming loops. Outside of this missed potential though, I seriously don't have any gripes with the movement. Oh, except for one more thing. The simplicity of controlling movement is absolutely great, but it can be a detriment at times. Earlier I said the contextual nature of movement was a strength, but it can occasionally become a weakness in tight corridors, where wall running can become frustrating. The way you snap onto a wall can lead to you bouncing back and forth when the surfaces are close together. This results in just mashing the jump button until you happen to get where you're trying to go. It doesn't sound like a big deal, and it's really not, but it especially sticks out when at all other times you feel in complete control of your character. It's one small setback that I'm not even sure how to solve, I just noticed it. Titanfall 2 keeps movement as a core part of its identity the whole way through, and cleverly uses the story to justify its choices when it comes to platforming obstacles and mechanics. The platforming never really feels contrived, and these locations feel like real places that just happen to have paths through them that you're equipped to take, rather than areas designed purely to be moved through and around. The world of Titanfall is compelling and feels fleshed out, with entertaining writing making you invested in the characters and their relationship, primarily Cooper and BT, his Titan. Having bought into the story makes certain platforming sections deeper and more rewarding. For example, this part where you're searching for the fold weapon in a research facility. You have to quickly warp between timelines to make it safely to the lower floor. The danger and challenge provides a lot of tension, but the drive to see the rest of the narrative plays into this tension and contributes to it. So by having a world and characters you care about, Titanfall 2 can craft movement that feels important to the player on multiple levels. You may have noticed that there's been zero mention of the multiplayer so far, which is significant as multiplayer in a game like this is to a lot of people more important than the campaign. Now the reason I haven't talked about it is because I think it's just okay. The biggest issue is how you're introduced to it. And let me be clear, I didn't touch the multiplayer until I finished the campaign, so I was well aware of how movement and gameplay worked. There's absolutely no tutorial at all, not even some text that explains different mechanics of the multiplayer. The most glaring case of this hurting the gameplay experience, and most appropriate to our topic, are the tactical abilities. These can be equipped and changed on separate loadouts, including stuff like brief invisibility, a shield, a boost in speed, and, a grappling hook. What the fuck? The grappling hook has the potential to completely change movement, how it works and flows and is engaged with, and it's just something you can equip at the start with absolutely no explanation as to how it's used. I only learned how to properly guide myself with it by watching a kill cam where someone killed me while swinging on it, and using it well isn't exactly obvious. Okay, so you shoot it at a surface, and then as it pulls you towards that surface, you can use the right stick to adjust your trajectory and direction. So instead of firing it at the corner of a building and just slamming against it, you can guide yourself to turn the corner of the building and possibly escape another player or give you time to prepare and kill them as they turn the corner. And this isn't told to you in any capacity. A major addition to the movement system, one of the core parts of the game's identity, is ignored and understated in the multiplayer. Then there's the maps. They're not bad, but I don't find any of them especially engaging. Some of them feel like they're built around Titan combat, and so movement as a pilot doesn't provide many interesting moments, as these maps are wider and flatter. A good chunk of them are just remastered from Titanfall 1, which did have good maps, but they come with no new ideas. Okay, I've been pretty harsh here, and that's not completely fair. I'm playing a multiplayer game for the first time 4 years into its life. The people who are still playing have spent a lot of time in the game, so the mistakes every new player makes are going to get punished and exploited more than they would have at its release. The movement specifically suffers due to the game's smaller player base. You're probably only going to be able to find deathmatch games if you don't want to wait around for 5 minutes, and I believe the movement truly shines in Capture the Flag. Capture the Flag requires you to get from one side of a map to the other as fast as possible to win, and so players are forced to figure out the best routes in a map and then to incorporate combat while taking those routes. CTF is chaotic and reactive and constantly changing, as your goal isn't to shoot anything, but either transport an objective or shoot one player in particular, and the movement of this game was made for that kind of play, so while the multiplayer now may be a bit samey and shallow, it's still fun, and I have no doubt it was more fun with a larger player base. The movement in Titanfall 2 is incredibly thoughtful and intelligent, all built with the purpose of feeling good and being fun. It makes sure to arrange exciting set pieces and theming around the movement mechanics to help them reach their full potential. Although I personally feel the true potential is never quite realized, moving through the campaign didn't feel repetitive or dull. The game is generous and accessible, setting a low bar for entry and a high bar for mastery. Unfortunately, this accessibility doesn't translate to the multiplayer and can leave new players feeling like they're lost or at a distinct disadvantage. But the versatility of movement empowers the player, imparts tension, provides exploration and awe, and works in conjunction with the rest of the game to feel purposeful, essential, and just plain fun. Thanks for watching.